In recent years, podcasts and other news media have begun to reevaluate and deconstruct the Satanic Panic, a bout of mass hysteria that afflicted the United States for over a decade. But what if it wasn't just hysteria? What if some of it was true? Tonight, we delve into the murder of Gary Lauwers. It's a tale of drugs, troubled youth, and ritual sacrifice. It's the case of the Devil and the Acid King, and I'm your host, Drew, and this is The Ritual Rewind.
See a ghost?
It was the summer of 1984.
Dude, what are these things?
Gremlins.
Ghostbusters and Gremlins had just opened in theaters. Duran Duran's Reflex blasted on the radio. The first Apple Macintosh was released the previous winter.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
And on June 19th, 1984, 4 boys entered the Aztakea Woods of Northport, Long Island, and one of them would never leave. It would be 2 more weeks before an anonymous phone call was made to the police.
Hello?
There's a body in the Aztakea Woods.
At first, the detectives thought it was a prank, but they investigated it anyway. They performed a brief search and found nothing. The Aztakea Woods got its name from a cluster of crumbling stone structures from within its confines that reminded folks of the Aztec ruins. The buildings had been constructed so long ago that no one knew who or why they had been built. The following day, the detectives received a second phone call, this time from a nun at an all-girls Catholic school.
I have a student here who says her boyfriend Gary Lauwers was murdered and buried in the Aztakea Woods.
Again, the police searched the woods, but this time they took with them a cadaver dog. The dog led them to a decaying corpse buried beneath only an inch of dirt. The body was severely decomposed and mutilated, the head decapitated, and the eyes gouged out. The medical examiner would later testify that Gary Lauwers was held down and stabbed at least 32 times. Whispers began to swirl around the affluent suburb. Numerous teenagers claimed to have seen, and even more to have heard, about the boy stabbed in the woods. A ritual sacrifice to Satan. And as the news of the murder spread through town, fear of a devil cult took hold.
Northport, Long Island, a quiet community rocked by reports a teenager was dragged through these woods toward a late-night ritual of death. An eyewitness said the victim, Gary Lauwers, was forced to pray to Satan as he was repeatedly stabbed to death.
There had been rumors of satanic cults in the community before. Just only a few years prior, in the 1970s, residents spoke in hushed tones about a coven of witches holding midnight ceremonies in the Aztakea ruins. But even more recently, there was a group called the Knights of the Black Circle. They wore denim jackets painted black with white pentagrams and other pagan iconography. It was a group rumored to have stolen, tortured, and killed neighborhood pets and painted satanic graffiti on the village walls. A member of the group said they were just a bunch of hippies that believed in peace, love, and harmony.
It wasn't a cult. There was just a group of kids that came down here that, were basically castaways, and they gave this town a bad name.
But his assurances did little to quell the dread simmering beneath the surface, especially once the arrests were made. 3 boys were arrested for the murder: Ricky Kasso, Jimmy Troiano, and Albert Quinos. 3 local high school dropouts, kicked out of their homes and living off the street. When Ricky Kasso was arrested, he was paraded in front of a group of reporters in an AC/DC shirt branded with an image of a green devil. That image sparked a full-on panic within the community. AC/DC was a rock band popular with youth in the 1970s and 80s. Its lead singer, Brian Johnson, belted out the lyrics, "I won't take no prisoners, I won't spare no lives, I've got my bells, and I'm gonna take you to hell." But before Ricky Kasso became the face of the Satanic Panic, he was just a boy from a middle-class family. The first time Ricky smoked marijuana, he was 10 years old, and by 7th grade he was taking LSD and PCP, and soon began stealing to support his habit. And it was around this time that Ricky began his initiation into devil worship. When Ricky was on acid, he'd go into the Aztakea Woods and he'd talk to the devil. Ricky often found himself in trouble with authorities and struggled in school. When his father forced him to join the football team, he hoped a more regimented schedule would fix Ricky. But instead, Ricky met another troublesome youth who would follow him into those woods, Jimmy Troiano. Jimmy Triano was born in 1965 and spent the first part of his life in an orphanage until he was adopted by his parents at the age of 4. The sense of abandonment never left him. To Jimmy, no one could be trusted. He often fought with his classmates with the express purpose to alienate them. Another friend of theirs, Albert Quinas, was an asshole to his friends and a menace to his enemies. He blended in well with Ricky and Jimmy. Gary Lauwers had known Ricky since elementary school. And much like Ricky, Gary was estranged from his parents and living on the street. But unlike Ricky, Gary was charming and easily approachable and well-liked. But that didn't keep Gary from becoming lawless, and he too was often in trouble for petty theft, burglary, and drug use. As Ricky's drug use increased, he dropped out of school, and frustrated with his son's lack of motivation and somewhat fearful of Ricky's obsession with the devil, Ricky's father kicked him out of the house and told him never to return. Homeless, Ricky bounced around town, sleeping on friends' couches, in the woods, and in public restrooms. Ricky spent most of his days hanging out at the local park where kids congregated after school and sold them some form of weed, LSD, or angel dust, and it's how he got the name, the Acid King. It was there that he met another transient who had a fascination with the devil. Pat Toussaint was an old man, a war veteran, and suffered from PTSD. He wore a silver pentagram necklace and carried with him the Satanic Bible. Pat was eager to share his thoughts on the spiritual realm with Ricky, and they soon bonded over the devil. After lengthy discussions with Pat, Rick could be found wandering the park screaming, "I am Satan." And when one of his friends asked him why he would choose to worship the devil, Ricky replied, "To gain power." Ricky would spend his evenings in the local cemetery. There he would get high and try to conjure Satan. At times he would bring a boombox and record himself chanting, "Satan, Satan, Satan," and then play it back. And to his astonishment, unrecognizable voices could be heard in the background of the recordings. Ricky believed the devil had possessed the cassette tapes and was sending them a message. And he got the sudden urge to dig up a body. He wanted to use the skull in an occult ritual at the most demon-possessed place he knew of in Long Island, the Amityville Horror House.
28 days after the Lutz family moved into their dream house, they were running for their lives. What happened to them is an experience in terror you will never forget, and you will believe in the Amityville Horror.
10 years before, in Amityville, Ronald Tefeo murdered his parents and 4 siblings while they slept. A year later, George and Kathleen Lutz moved into the house with their children, where they claimed they were terrorized by demonic forces. And in April 1984, Ricky and Pat traveled 20 miles to the Amityville house. They wanted to participate in Walpurgisnacht, a German pagan holiday, where witches banded together to swoop around on broomsticks and dance with the devil. Ricky and Pat stood on the front lawn of the horror house reading passages from the Satanic Bible in hopes of raising the dead. And though nobody rose up from the pits of hell, Ricky came back a changed man. And it would be at a friend's party that his devil would be unleashed. In May 1984, Ricky was passed out on a couch, having taken too many hits on a PCP lace joint. It was then that Gary saw an opportunity to make some money and stole 10 bags of angel dust out of Ricky's jacket. His intention was to sell the bags for $10 and pocket the money. But instead, he ended up smoking half of it. The next morning, Ricky found Gary and attacked him. He wanted his drugs back. Gary gave him back the 5 remaining bags that he had, and Ricky demanded payment for the rest. But Gary didn't have any money. Ricky told Gary that he had 2 weeks, or next time he was coming back for more, and it wasn't just going to be a black eye. But with no way to get the money, Gary went into hiding. When Gary didn't turn up with his money, Ricky went looking for him and ended up on Gary's front porch. But Gary hadn't lived there for a while now, and his mother, Yvonne, hadn't seen him for weeks. She still cared deeply for her son and paid his debt. She asked Ricky if he could let bygones be bygones, and he told her he would, but Ricky was lying. Gary had stolen from him, and that was inexcusable. Ricky wanted revenge. According to the Satanic Bible, a human sacrifice should only be performed to dispose of a totally obnoxious and deserving individual. Anyone who has unjustly wronged you, anyone who has gone out of his way to hurt you, or to deliberately cause trouble and hardship for you. And for Ricky, that was Gary. On June 19th, school had just wrapped for the summer, and the kids were excited. And even though Gary had dropped out of school a while ago, he had something to celebrate too. Thanks to his mother, he was off the hook with Ricky. Or so he thought. Gary met Ricky, Albert, and Jimmy at the park, and Ricky handed him some microdots, a peace offering. Ricky told Gary, "I'm going to get some beers and we're going to get fucked. Do you want to join us?" Gary, happy to be back in the fold, agreed. Ricky then bought a dozen donuts from Duncan, and the four boys headed into the Aztakea Woods, dosing themselves with LSD as they went. Another friend of theirs attempted to join them later, but there was no moon and he got lost. And in the shadows of the woods, he heard a voice say, "You shouldn't be here." He took it as a warning and left. As the boys walked through the woods, black crows circled overhead, and Ricky turned to Gary and said, "Satan is with us." At the ruins, Ricky tried to start a bonfire, but the wood was so damp that he couldn't get it started, so he ordered Gary to donate his clothing to the flames. First, he forced Gary to cut off the sleeves of his jacket with a switchblade and toss him into the fire. But that wasn't enough, so he made Gary take off his socks and throw him in too, and then snippets of his hair. Gary began to grow uneasy, and he blurted out, "I have funny vibes that you're going to kill me." Ricky smiled at him. It was then that Ricky heard a crow caw and believed it was the devil. Hearing Satan's voice, Ricky stabbed Gary with his switchblade, then Jimmy ran up and kicked him in the ribs, hard enough to feel the bones cave in. Somehow, Gary escaped the initial attack and fled, but Jimmy chased him down and dragged him back to the fire. He held him down while Ricky stabbed him, and of his participation, Jimmy had this to say, "I knew that Gary had to be killed, or he would rat us out if he lived." Gary cried out for his mother, but Ricky commanded him to say, "I love Satan." Hoping to stop the pain, Gary obliged. Those were his last words. Albert, for his part, stood by and did nothing to help. He just watched. When Gary lay lifeless in the dirt, Ricky started laughing. There was smoke coming out of Gary's back. The heat of his blood was mixing with the cool night air. Ricky attempted to drag Gary away, but Gary suddenly sat up, and Ricky lunged at him again and hacked away at his face. Following the brutal murder, Albert, Jimmy, and Ricky went back to Albert's place and slept it off. The following morning, Ricky tossed the knife into the river and went to the park. As the day wore on and the drugs wore off, Ricky felt that he needed to brag to someone, anyone, about what he had done. And when his friend Rich stumbled into the park, he confessed. Rich didn't believe him. He thought it was the drugs talking, so Ricky showed him Gary's body. Rich could smell it the moment he stepped into the ruins. And Ricky told him Gary's in hell now because we made him say he loved Satan. Rich fled and told no one what he had seen. He was too afraid to. But rumors began to spread because Ricky was talking. A few days later, Ricky started to worry about what would happen if someone found Gary's body. So he and Jimmy went back to the Aztakea ruins to bury it. They dug a shallow grave and dragged Gary into it. But Gary was so badly decomposed that his head just fell off, and Ricky kicked it into the grave. The boys were arrested on July 5th, and Ricky was charged with second-degree murder. 2 days later, alone in jail, Ricky heard the cell block begin to chant, "Hang up," and as if compelled by the devil himself, Ricky took a sheet off the bed, tied a noose around his neck, and hung himself. He was pronounced dead at 2:17 in the morning. With Ricky dead, Jimmy was the only one left to try for Gary's murder. Albert had already agreed to testify against Ricky and Jimmy in exchange for immunity. But in the end, it didn't matter. The jury found Jimmy not guilty. But thanks to some judicial intervention, Jimmy was immediately placed back in jail, pending another trial on a burglary charge from a few weeks prior to the murder. On that charge, Jimmy would be found guilty and sentenced to several years in jail. Albert Quinos left Northport after the trial and remained relatively silent about the crime until 2023, when he released a book titled Eyewitness, The True Story of the Northport Aztakea Woods. In the end, the Northport police would ultimately decide that the murder of Gary Lauwers wasn't a satanic ritual sacrifice, but was instead a drug-fueled act of violence.
Even Police Chief Robert Howard, who's lived here for 20 years, doesn't believe it.
I don't believe there was a cult. There was 2 or 3 people who walked around with satanic literature, who said or professed a belief in Satan, who said they practiced satanic worship. It's garbage.
Prosecutor William Keon would say they did some bizarre things, and the killing involved some ritualistic acts, but unlike Charles Manson, it was not part of a cult. In researching this episode, we relied heavily on articles from the New York Times, the article Kids in the Dark by David Breskin, and the book The Acid King by Jesse Pollack. Links to these sources can be found in the show notes. Thank you for joining us tonight on the Ritual Rewind. As always, please leave a review, tell a friend, and subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. You can interact with us at The Ritual Rewind on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Links are in the show notes. And since we are a podcast about when cassette culture met cult culture, stay tuned after this short break for this week's film pairing. This week's recommended movie pairing isn't a movie at all. It's a TV series. Hysteria spans 8 episodes and was released on the streaming service Peacock last year. Set in 1989 during the height of the Satanic Panic, strange incidents begin to happen in the small Michigan town of Happy Hollow when a popular high school football player is abducted, and all that's left is a pentagram painted on the garage door. And when the boy is found murdered in what appears to be a satanic ritual sacrifice, the town goes into a full-blown panic. Dylan, a high school outcast played by MJ Anthony, spends most of his days hanging out with his only friends and heavy metal bandmates Spud and Jordy, played by Kezzy Curtis and Kiara Aurelia. Thanks to the intense media coverage, Dylan realizes that the murdered footballer has mattered more in death than he has ever in life. And in a knee-jerk reaction while being bullied for his metal band, Dylan proclaims to be the leader of a satanic cult and ropes his friends in on the lie. Suddenly, they're the most popular group in all of high school and attract the attention of the most influential students in the school who are eager to join their cult. And this includes Dylan's crush, Judith, who has an unhealthy obsession with the occult and also happens to be the granddaughter of the town's police chief, played by Bruce Campbell. And as the rumors of the occult activity increase, the town believes their children are being seduced by the devil. Tracy Whitehead, played with religious ferocity by Anna Camp, stokes the fires, rallying a beleaguered ladies' church group against these satanic attacks and those that are perpetrating it, Dylan and his friends. She does this while harboring a dark secret all her own. Hysteria name-checks many of the keystones of the Satanic Panic, such as Geraldo's infamous special, the FBI manual on satanic ritual abuse, heavy metal bands, and overzealous parents. But the show's good vibes do little to help carry it over its bloated runtime, and it would have been better suited as a movie or with a shorter run of episodes. But as is, I would rate it 3 VHS tapes out of 5. Thank you for joining us on the Ritual Rewind, and have a good night.